Hey friends, I think we're going to get started. I want to be respectful of everybody's precious time. We have such an amazing panel of friends and alum of our law school who are here to help us talk a little bit about a panel I wish I had seen when I was in law school. I actually ended up going, I'm Jennifer Espinola, if I haven't met each of you yet, here as your Dean of Students at the law school. And I felt like an anomaly when I went to law school because my interest was in working in higher education. That's actually why I went, and tried to design a law school experience that would allow me to work in higher education, which is all I've done ever since. But that was not a conversation that was happening 22 years ago. And so I love that we are here to tell a little bit more about a career path that I think is a really exciting one. And we've got some awesome folks here who work in various different offices and different kinds of work throughout the university and other universities. So we're going to tell some stories about that journey and then give you all a chance to ask any questions that you might have about that. So what we'll ask each of you to do just to kick things off and help us learn a little bit about you is tell us who you are and what you do, and a little bit about how law school ended up in a path for you to be working in higher education. What was a little bit of your journey? And maybe I'll have Sandy start for us.
Sure. So thanks for being here. As most of you know me, I'm Sandy Weintraub. I currently work for, my title's long, it's U of Senate Secretary, I have to look at it myself, and advisor to the president. Before that role, I've had a lot of different roles in higher ed. And I've actually worked in higher ed ever since I graduated law school in 2010 in a variety of roles. I worked in student affairs for almost a decade in various parts. I've worked with a program that did legislative work. I've done work now with the University Senate, the President's Office. And for me, I went to law school and I realized pretty early on that I didn't want to be a traditional attorney. But I also realized pretty early on that I really loved institutions. And understanding how to affect that, and I knew that that related to kind of developing policy and things like that. I kind of looked at the more traditional role of creating policy, but also what you could do on the inside. And I also really love working with students, which was another piece with a bit of an education background and things like that. So I'll let everyone go because I've had a lot of different roles in it. But what I found is higher ed can bring stability. It can bring a really, really nice role where you have good benefits. You get to work in a really, really beautiful, really vibrant place. And you get to affect an institution that has a really positive effect on a lot of people's lives. So that's, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Kniss-Young. I'm currently the Chief Civil Rights Officer and Title IX Coordinator here at UBO. I've been in this role since October of 2020, so pandemic job. And before that, for 11 years, I actually worked here at the law school, and I had a job that Sarah Kasky currently has. And so I did lots of things in that capacity. I know Sandy and Tyler and Kimberly from my time as the assistant dean at the law school. And I know Jamie, because she used to work at the law school. And so I oversee the office that responds to reports of discrimination, harassment. Sometimes we investigate complaints. We look at not just so not just sex and gender under Title IX, but all protected statuses under our policy. So race, veteran status, disability, genetic status, marital status, so all of those things. So we respond to reports. Most reports are resolved with an educational approach. And then sometimes when there are more serious allegations, we'll investigate, and sometimes folks end up with a sanction. Before coming to UVO, I practiced law for about 7 years. I did employment law and also insurance defense work, and then my first job out of law school was clerking at Lane County Circuit Court for a judge, and I swear if they paid double, I would have stayed. It was the funnest job ever. So if you get the opportunity, I strongly encourage you all to either do that as an externship or after law school. It's just the best for a judge.
Awesome, thank you.
Hey folks, I'm Jamie Moffett. I'm the Senior Vice President for Finance and Administration and the CFO for the university. And basically in my job, I oversee a lot of the finance and admin functions of the university, so things like HR and IS and budget finance, and often the way my teams think about our work is we do a lot of things that nobody knows about. So, we have a power station on campus, which a lot of people don't know about. And usually people know about us when things go wrong. So if the utilities go off, they don't get their paycheck, those kinds of things. Then we suddenly become front and center. But we basically provide a lot of services that help campus run, essentially, in our portfolio. I was one of those people that went to law school knowing I probably wasn't going to practice. I wasn't sure, but I kind of went in thinking that education would be really helpful, and it has proven to be incredibly helpful, and I'm happy to chat more about that in the future. I did a joint degree in law school, so I was able to take some business classes and learn that I really loved that. So out of law school, I actually went private sector. I worked for a big consulting firm, McKinsey & Company, for a number of years, did some interesting work with large organizations. I landed most prominently in mergers and acquisitions, so I got involved in work where one organization either purchased or merged with another organization, and basically all the deal makers left, and the people were left sitting around going, okay, now what do we do? And I would lead teams that would come in and help people to figure out how do you reorganize, how do you refocus, how do you move forward. And I really enjoyed that work and realized that I really like doing things that are very operational, very hands-on. After that, I worked for some startups during the internet bubble. I had the great misfortune of joining a startup company 6 weeks before the crash. So I got to live through the, wow, we have 200 people, we're worth 30 million. Oh, we got to lay off most of the company and figure out what to do. So that was really hard. I moved out to Eugene about 22 years ago. I was a trailing spouse, so my partner at the time was the one who came out here. I ended up just working for some small companies in town, and then I ended up actually working at the law school for about 7 years. I was the Associate Dean for Finance and Operations and did some teaching and research. Then I moved over to athletics for a couple of years, and then I've been in my current job for about 11 years.
Great, thank you so much.
Hi everyone, I'm Kimberly Coops. I am the Assistant Vice President of Government Relations at Oregon Tech, which is our state's only public polytechnic university. So it is one of Oregon's 7 public universities, just like University of Oregon. But previous to that, I was actually the Director of Advocacy and Policy at U of O until about 2 weeks ago. So I know everything about Oregon Tech. Feel free to ask me all the questions. I had a pretty traditional government relations path. I grew up in remote rural Oregon, actually, and I was a beneficiary of the Oregon Opportunity Grant and the Federal Pell Grant. And that is really what piqued my interest in higher ed. Growing up in rural Oregon, I was one of very few students in my high school who went on to college and then actually completed a degree. And I wouldn't have been able to have that path if not for student aid. And so that is really what interested me in higher education policy, because I think that our public universities and higher education in general really is the great equalizer, or at least it has the opportunity to be the great equalizer and to give everyone, regardless of their circumstances, opportunities to succeed. So while I was in college, I actually went to a small private liberal arts college in Oregon because it was cheaper with financial aid to do that than to attend an Oregon public university, because our state ranks 45th out of 50 when it comes to per student funding for our public universities. And while I was in college, I attended a lunch with Senator Markley's Deputy Chief of Staff to hear about internships. Full disclosure, I actually ended up going to that lunch because it was a free lunch. And then I ended up walking away saying, oh wow, like anyone can do this. Applied for an internship, got it, ended up really falling in love with DC and progressive politics. So I moved out to DC after I graduated from undergrad. And I had originally thought, oh, I'll work for 1 year and then go to law school. And I ended up just really enjoying the career that I was in and working for about 6 years. And then finally really missed Oregon. You know, hurricanes, blizzards, not as much fun as just constant rain. And so I moved back to Oregon for law school at U of O and found out that U of O has a government relations law student position. And so I worked in government relations for U of O all through law school, and ultimately that ended up turning into a full-time job after I graduated as our Director of Advocacy and Policy. And what I really loved about working in higher ed policy at U of O and now at Oregon Tech is that you kind of get to be a Jane or a Jack or a person of all trades. Universities do research, so you get to work on things like climate change policy and policies that impact the environment. You heard from Jamie about some of the work that the VPFA's office does, and so you get to learn about things like state bonding policy, which was stuff that I never thought I would get to work on or be interested in, but it's really interesting and it makes a huge difference when it comes to our campus facilities. And so what I like about my job is that I get to touch a lot of different areas and also make a difference for our students at the end of the day.
Awesome. I'm Tyler Hinton. I'm Assistant Director of Compliance and Athletics here at U of O. What I do is help our department and the university follow NCAA rules, mainly on financial aid, athletic scholarships, amateurism, and just help out the office in general as well. I graduated with Sandy in 2010. And the economy was still kind of reeling from the housing crisis, so after bar admission I was looking for work, and I had a classmate that had skipped the bar and gone straight into interning in compliance, and the NSA was investigating a major infraction in the department, and so when they needed some extra help, she recommended me. I said, yeah, that sounds great. I've always had an interest in playing and watching sports and athletics in general. So I jumped at the opportunity, and I went through boxes and boxes of phone records. My colleagues like to joke that I had hair before I started. So I did that for a while, but it was my foot in the door. I did an internship after that, then became a coordinator, and I'm in my current role. So I kind of just fell into it.
So back when phone records were paper.
Yeah, and they weren't 8.5 by 11. They were like 5 by 6 or something. It was a indoctrination, pacing maybe. I don't know.
So things are improving. Things
Yeah.
are improving, right? And my own journey, as I said, I went to law school trying to get into higher education, so I had a graduate assistantship for my second and third year of law school in the Dean of Students office at the University of Miami, where I went to school, and then they hired me right out of law school as assistant dean, so I was doing conduct, very similar path to Sandy. Doing conduct work with students, which I really enjoyed, honor code work, and I worked with fraternities and sororities, I worked in housing, I did a very generalized kind of student affairs experience, and have been in student affairs ever since, mostly in leadership development before I came here to law school. So let's talk a little bit more about the transition, and especially being able to tell our law school story and law school experience in order to help us get jobs in higher education. How were we able to leverage that or talk about that intentionally in interviewing for those positions? Or where did we have to actually help people understand the benefit of this degree if they were looking to people that had maybe different kinds of background than bringing law school to it? So if anybody has thoughts about that. Yeah.
Happy to start. So I was really lucky because the consulting firm that I worked for was actually actively recruiting law students, even though it was in a business field. They called us APDs, Advanced Professional Degrees, because what they had figured out is that with the training you get in law school and other advanced degrees, your communication skills get much better, your writing skills get much better, your problem-solving skills get much better, issue identification, and those were all the things they realized were the building blocks for what we needed to do. And so I was really lucky because they recognized that, and then they actually gave us business training for the work we were doing. But I think it's important, I mean, those skills have helped me tremendously throughout my career. The other one I'd make a plug for, if you have the opportunity, is I was highly involved in alternative dispute resolution. So mediation training, negotiation training, communication skills, that was amazing. Those are probably the skills I've used the most in my career. But I think there's a lot of transferable skills in law school that you get. It also helps that you can talk to lawyers and you're not intimidated, you know kind of what they're talking about. But I found that really helpful with my career. So.
You know, so I had, although when I went to law school, I was actually had no plans to practice law. I was actually a foreign national. I grew up in Canada. I know people sometimes refer to it as the 51st state, but you do need a passport to come here. So I was technically an international student, and so I was graduating, and I actually had had a huge interest in intercollegiate athletics because I was a student athlete, and those jobs are really hard to find. And so that's how I was like, well, if I want to try and stay here, I got to find a job, and so that's how I ended up in the clerkship. And so I really enjoyed the clerkship, and then I went on, and then I said, well, I've done a clerkship, I have a law degree, I should practice law. So I practiced for a while, but then, you know, I realized that I just wasn't going to be a lifer. I didn't want to work in a firm. It wasn't how I, day-to-day, wasn't how I wanted to spend my time, although there are aspects of that work that I really enjoyed. And so when the assistant dean position here opened up, I applied for it, and what I really liked about it was the opportunity to work with students. And when I'd been a student athlete on the track team, I had done a lot of leadership work. I had been like team captain and gone to various leadership trainings and things like that as a student. I've been an advocate for students on the team and in the athletic department, and so I liked administration, and I liked the idea of working day-to-day with students. I also really liked the variety of the job that the assistant dean job provided, and that was, the variety was a thing lacking from the kind of practice that I had, and so that really spoke to me. And so I applied, and Jamie was on my hiring committee. I applied and I landed here, and then while I was here at the law school, I became a deputy Title IX coordinator and became interested in that work. And so when the person who was the Title IX coordinator at the time announced she was leaving, I thought about applying for the job, and I thought I would be nuts to apply for the job, and then I clearly am nuts because I ultimately applied for the job. And so that's how I made that transition, and I really like that work. I don't work as much directly with students, but have the opportunity to really think about policy and process improvement and data gathering with the aim of understanding what's happening on our campus so that we can look at ways to improve our interventions, but also improve our prevention efforts across the board, not just related to sex and gender and Title IX concerns, but across the board for our employees as well, and help folks respond better in the moment when things happen.
I was thinking while you were talking, talking about the transition, it's something that you are going to want to be prepared to talk about, because when I transitioned to student affairs, even though I had had 2 years of experience working at UO in student conduct as in a graduate assistantship, in that field, they're very skeptical of attorneys because a lot of them have had, in their mind, very negative experience with attorneys. So it really helped to have been through the law school experience to help them understand that, tell them what your skill set was, but also say, my goal here is not to operate as an attorney. That's not what the job would be. It's to use those skills, especially understanding how policy is developed, how regulations are developed. I know something Tyler deals a lot with as well, which may not be the law, but the ideas, a lot of things you even learn in even the foundational law school classes of the philosophy behind making policy, how policy construction, how to read policy in a way to help understand how then to interpret it to a various situation is really what a lot of the jobs that you can get in higher ed with a law background are going to entail. And I think that there's so many different types of law classes that you can fall back on and talk about how you had to analyze a case, understand what was being discussed in that case at its very essence. Because when I did student conduct, to be honest, when you get a complicated case, what you're trying to find is what's going on at its essence to understand how it relates back to that policy so you can make a decision. And I think law school actually does a phenomenal job at training you for that, even if you're not thinking about it at the time. Because you sort of have to get to that point. You have to get the essence of something when you're reading cases and things like that. And then the other piece, again, the fact that Jamie's here is amazing, is because Jamie was my teacher in negotiation, and it was amazing.
Feeling very old right now.
But it's the communication, it really is. I mean, you all are lucky that we have such amazing ADR classes here, and taking advantage of that to help build your interpersonal communication, but in that very specific, focused way where you're trying to solve problems. Because at an institution, in any role in higher education, that's kind of what you're going to be doing. And that type of communication skills that you're getting in those type of classes were always essential.
And athletic compliance at JD is desirable. It's not necessary, but it's certainly a bonus because, I mean, the NCAA has a big rule book that's make-believe law. But still, we have to follow it as a member, so it's practicing bylaws essentially. So the skills that have been described certainly come in handy when you're looking at a rule and reading it critically and interpreting what words mean and what they're saying and what they're not saying, and how that applies to a real world situation and how you want to build a system to either monitor it or react to it. So it was a big bonus, but we have people in our office that don't have a JD that can do similar things, but we definitely, me and a coworker that have them getting them done quite a bit, which is nice. I like using those skills from our class time.
Yeah, and I would echo everything that everyone else on the panel has said, but having a JD is really a huge asset if you're interested in government relations. Obviously, you are working on making new laws, and so having a law degree is a good thing. And I would say that there's a lot of folks who work in policy, advocacy, and GR who don't have law degrees, and they do often rely on the opinions of folks in government relations who do have a law degree. My degree was an asset to me in my negotiation process for my new job, actually, and my institution is paying my bar dues, and they're paying for CLEs. So the other piece of advice that I would give is if you are that person who knows you probably are not ever going to want to practice, still take the bar, pass the bar, maintain an active bar membership. I maintain an active bar membership, but don't pay for PLF because I'm not practicing. I am an attorney, but not the university's attorney. And I will also say that I think that that's a huge asset that I bring having a law degree, is that I know when I should be flagging things for our general counsel and for other folks on campus. So something that the public university lobbyists do is every year before the start of a long legislative session, we go through the multi-thousands of bills that have been pre-session filed. And just based on a quick glance, we figure out, is this something that our public universities need to be tracking? And as I was going through that meeting this year, I realized that the things that I was immediately spotting were the same things our GCs were spotting. And so that's something that makes our general counsel's life a lot easier, because I know when I need to be coming to him with something and when something might end up being an issue for the institution. And just in terms, going back to Dean Espinola's original question around how you sell yourself, I think it's making sure that you are taking the classes and having the experiences in law school that are going to set you up to be successful in the policy world. So if you can do something like one of the Wayne Morris legal fellowships on Capitol Hill, do that. I did that even though I'd worked on Capitol Hill before going to law school. I knew I wanted to stay engaged and stay in the policy space, and so I went back, worked on the Hill on the Senate side for Senator Ron Wyden. And that helped me keep my connections fresh. It helped me get more experience that ultimately was able to set me up for the career that I've had post-law school. But mention those classes too, like Jamie was saying, negotiation was actually a class that in my cover letter for my new job, I mentioned, I said, you know, that I excelled in negotiation. I excelled in classes like state administrative law, labor law. If you're interested in higher ed, the higher ed space too, think through like all of the different pieces that public universities have. So like, you know, U of O has a power plant, you know, like energy policy is something that might help set you up to work for a big institution, and labor law especially. Universities are made up of people, so labor and employment law are good courses to take. And then obviously all of the policy focused classes, and make sure you're mentioning that to folks.
The bar is an interesting thing I was thinking about too, so I'm glad you touched on that. So I wonder if there's other opinions about taking the bar exam, because I've tried to coach students into this. I will admit I never took it. I knew 100% the kinds of jobs that I wanted to be in did not require it. I don't know if I regret not doing it, but I'll tell you that every time I've thought about wanting to do it later, it has felt extremely hard. You know, 10, 15, 20 years later. So if I was gonna do it, I wish I'd done it like right away. I'm right out of school. But I do see some students kind of trying to decide if they should do that. And I like your plug, Kimberly. I think that it is a good thing to consider, and especially because our law school already invests in you to give you the bar class for free, which not all law schools do.
Most don't.
Yeah, most actually do not. So I think that's another plug for it. But are there other thoughts about how this has come up for you?
So I didn't take the bar when I graduated, but it was a little bit different back then. Not only back then and stuff, but it really was extremely different. Not only was the law school didn't pay for bar degree and didn't have the support that was available for the prep, but it was far, far more location specific, even in that area. And for me, the reciprocity was a completely different system. I always forget the acronyms, the UBE
Yeah.
Didn't exist.
didn't exist.
That's right.
So for me, I was really, I had done my second year summer in New York City. I grew up in the Midwest. I was really focused on going what was gonna be the best fit for me. And and at that point, choosing to take a bar in a location didn't make any sense, because I really wanted to keep myself open and had no idea where I wanted to live.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, that was super restrictive. If I would have taken a bar where I ended up getting my first job in California, which is a bar that still don't really cooperate with anyone else, it would have made zero sense, because I knew I wasn't gonna stay there for my career, and I wasn't gonna practice. So for me, I focused on being pretty certain that I wasn't going to work in law. And I thought about that a lot. My first summer, I did a law-related fellowship and had a great experience. As I kind of went further along, it became more obvious for me. So then I was more focused during my 3L year of just trying to get connections to find employment that didn't necessarily around the country rather than that. But it's also a really strong argument that if you ever think you're going to do it, doing it right away, and especially now that we pay for it, since you're all sitting here, is an argument that if that would have been in place when I was in your shoes, I probably would have taken it. But I don't regret it, actually. And I have gone back, and I think that's important. I think for me, as I had times in my career where I still knew I loved it, but I didn't maybe love the specific piece of my job, I think if I would have had that to fall back on, I might have left a career which I ended up really loving, because it might have been easier to get a job, but instead I maintained focus on that. So for me, it was the right decision. But I think that things have changed since then.
Such a good point about the UV and everything. That's a big change.
You may get 5 different answers from all of us. So
Yeah.
I actually, the firm I went to work with paid for bar degree,
Yeah.
which was amazing. It's a business firm, and they're like, yeah, we'll pay for you to take the bar. So I'm very risk averse, so I just spent that summer studying. I took the bar. I was very glad that I had that, because it felt like that was kind of if the consulting didn't work out, I felt like, okay, I have this career in my back pocket that I could go to. I retired from the bar about 3 years later, because I realized I'm not going to practice and I'm just paying dues. So I'm like a retired member of the Massachusetts bar, which probably doesn't help much. But I didn't regret doing it, because at the time, for me, it gave me a sense of security of, okay, I've gone this path, I've passed the bar, I have the ability to practice, but if I fall back on that.
So I would encourage folks to take the bar. I think the law school pays for it. That's just a tremendous opportunity that most students across the country don't have. I also think that with the UVE, it's extremely portable. And so it is very different from when Sandy and Tyler graduated. And so it does give you that flexibility. It also makes you feel like you've finished your degree. And I will say, even though I ended up, and I am still active member of the bar, and I've served on many bar committees during my time as a member of the bar. And so even though I don't practice law currently, the experiences that I had practicing law really, really, really helped me in my current job. Like I did employment law. I understand those. I've worked with so many of the laws that we are responsible for navigating around. So I still get advice from the general counsel because I'm not the university's lawyer, but I do have this sort of fundamental, not just something abstract I learned in law school, but also real world experience working with many of the statutes that we're tasked with ensuring we comply with.
Great. These are good points. Some of you have already touched on this, but I just want to make sure that we can give our best case for higher ed. Why? Why is this a great place to work? What's fun about it? And then also what's challenging that people need to keep in mind as they would consider this kind of option compared to the other more traditional legal jobs.
So I will go out and say we're an environment where people are educated, and educated people didn't have opinions.
Say more.
And so you're often encounter people who think they're right. And it's interesting because we in our office, we grapple with like, what does this mean and what is the best approach? And people on either side of our cage like, I'm right. We don't know what the right answer is. We're trying to make the best decision we can based on the information we have. But I do think that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because you're sitting on a committee and people have ideas, and it provides, I think, opportunity for your ongoing learning as well and for interesting engagement. But people have opinions.
Yes. Robust debate in higher ed.
Robust debate, that's a good way to put it.
Yes. What else are your pitches or your warnings?
Oh, I also think it's a beautiful environment to work in, and students are just, it's just great to be around students.
I would say that on the plus side, I mean, the people are amazing. People that choose to work in higher ed, I've just worked with such incredible people, and for me, jobs are all about people, because you spend a lot of your day with them, so being around great people is really helpful. You also just, you know, you have the opportunity to do a lot more here than you would if you were in a different organization. So, you know, you look at my organization, we're very admin, we're not, you know, we're not touching usually teaching, research, and service, but we still can do really creative things. So like we started a admin internship program about 3 years ago. We have, this year we have 10 or 12 admin interns, and just getting to work with students is amazing. And it was just, that was something I wanted to do. So I was like, let's start an admin, you know, an internship program. And there are ways you have more flexibility sometimes. I would say it's tough in that higher ed is very leanly staffed. There's always not enough people to do everything that needs to get done. And so I think some people sometimes look at higher ed and think, oh, there's a cush job, like I'm not gonna work private sector, I'll do this. That is not the case. Often, you know, when I do interact with private sector companies, they just have many more resources. And so you have to be prepared that, you know, you're probably stepping in a role where you don't have enough staff to do everything you wanna do. So you have to love what you do, because otherwise you'll not feel great about that. So that is a challenge, but the people are wonderful, the mission's wonderful, the environment of just being on the campus is fantastic. Just really a lot of great positives. I kind of fell into this career. Again, I was a trailing spouse, I was like coming to Eugene, but I've loved it, so.
Yeah, I'll echo that the people are amazing, and it's collegial, and you feel like you're on the same team for a mission, and putting the university forward that's worthwhile. And then Eugene itself and the campus is beautiful, but that's just great to hear. But I'm sure there's other okay places. But another nice positive to contrast to a lot of graduates go into, which is practicing law, is it's really nice not to have a billable hour. You know, not have to work 10 hours for 8 hours of pay, essentially. So that's wonderful. And then similarly, I mean, a big public university like we have, the benefits here are nice, the employment benefits. And I just got done with 3 months of paternity leave, and it's wonderful. And so those are all, I would say, additional positives. And it is a negative side is that being a large organization, sometimes it can be bureaucratic, and sometimes it's slow to change, and things like that, where maybe you see something that you'd like to be different, and other people would like to be different, and it just takes a while. So that can sometimes be frustrating.
Yeah, and I would echo everything that everyone else has said, and I would just say that if you are looking to make a difference in people's lives, I think that there's no better place to do that than working in higher education, because not only do you get to do things like touch opportunity for people by, in government relations, advocating for student aid programs and for an institution that's creating opportunities for people, but at U of O especially, U of O is an R1 research university. There's a lot of cool stuff that's happening out of the night campus and with faculty across all of the colleges around just groundbreaking research that has an impact on everyday people's lives. And you know, in the healthcare space and in other spaces. And so I think if you're someone who's motivated and is passionate about helping others, higher ed's a great place to work. The benefits are wonderful. The work-life balance is really fantastic. As someone who works in government relations, my job is totally cuckoo bananas between January and June, most years because of both the state legislative sessions and then also congressional appropriations. And so I work a whole lot of hours and basically work every single day, late into the evening. But then over the summer, universities are really sleepy. You know, most of your faculty are off doing other things, students aren't on campus, and so you really have an opportunity to recharge working in higher ed that you don't have at other institutions. My husband practices law, and he does have billable hour requirements, and so I see the contrast in our lives and in how much we're working, and you know, his practice is just always busy all the time, and I kind of get that recess where I can reset and recharge. All of the campuses, I mean, if you're a campus-based employee, are really wonderful. Obviously, U of O has a beautiful campus. But in government relations and higher ed, there are positions that are based in DC too. So if you're interested in being more of a traditional lobbyist who is DC based, you can have that experience in higher ed. You know, every university across the country probably has a contract lobbyist or somebody who's campus based, even a small institution like Oregon Tech. We have a federal contract lobbyist based in DC, and we have a state contract lobbyist in addition to me. And so there's a lot of opportunities there, but I would say if you're interested in higher ed policy and working in higher ed government relations, your job is going to be way nicer if you are someone who's actually employed by the university versus somebody who's working as a contract lobbyist, because you do get to take advantage of you know, the benefits like retirement and healthcare, and you get to do the fun stuff like working with students.
A couple other challenges, because I'll close with what I love about it, but that I was thinking that there is not, and a lot of it has to do with the way that it's staffed, there aren't always ways to move up in an organization internally. A lot of people jump around the country in higher ed. And that's something that, especially within, you know, I was in student affairs for a long time, and it's extremely common within that field to really feel like you have to go to a new place, and because it's higher ed and there are not many organizations within the same city, you're probably gonna have to move. You know, I'm very fortunate to only have done it once. I know folks in higher ed who have done it a dozen times for certain types of things. So it's something that you can make a decision to stay in one place, which I've done. You have to be a little more flexible, and you have to be able to think about different ways you can move your career. So that is one piece that can be challenging. I think that something that Jamie brought up, it really is true about the understaffing. It can be glaring in certain areas, and it's just, you have to be the kind of person who is okay with, it's not even necessarily going to be working the longest hours. You're just going to have to do things that are completely other duties as assigned. And some people are really okay with that, and some people aren't. And if you're more flexible and you're just like, something happens and you just got to deal with it, or people ask you to be on committees, or people ask you to serve on something on a weekend, and you're just like, okay, that sounds interesting, or maybe it's not interesting, and you do it anyway. But I think in the higher ed space that is more common, where people just have that can-do attitude. But on the other hand, more people want to do that because they love being here and it's so mission-based. I want to reiterate the benefits. I've done a full parental leave twice and was fully supported, and that was pretty important and pretty amazing for my family. And not every institution is going to do that and is going to embrace that the way that I felt being able to do, and that was huge. You know, it's not true at every campus, but my family's been able to take advantage of preschool on campus, which has been amazing to have kind of our whole campus here. It's hard to get a spot, but if you can, just having everyone in the community. My wife works on campus as well, so we're like you just feel a bond to the place. Like I know some people have that experience with a law firm or with a corporation, but you know, whether it be to go to root for the sports teams on a superficial level, but it's still really fun. You actually get a great discount football tickets. Or on a more, you know, what I love about higher ed more than anything is that if you think about it, everyone is really here to better themselves in some way. It's the whole purpose of a university, is that whether you're here to get a degree or to better yourself in some way, to get yourself to a position that's different in life, undergraduate degree, graduate degree, doctoral degree, whatever that might be, it's all kind of in that traditional path. And then if you're doing research, you know, which a ton of people do, you mentioned the R1, it's a piece that people don't think about in a place like this, but it's mind-boggling the amount of things that are going on this campus. And if you kind of pay attention, and I work with faculty now often, so I get to really hear about the projects, and we also, with the Senate, we also go through the program approval, so I know all the new things that are going on in campus, and it's really amazing, cutting-edge stuff, and you get to work with an higher ed, and to be in the same space and the same institution of places that are really trying to make the world better. And I think with that, all the staff who work at university, in the end, you're working towards that goal with those students, with those researchers, with those staff. And I do feel that connection. And I think that while, you know, the pay is not always going to be the same as in the private sector, that is true. I think in a lot of positions it's not necessarily competitive, but the benefits are amazing. So I think that counterbalances that a little bit. But it's a unique environment to work in. And if you kind of have that feeling you want to be a part of something that's mission-based, it's a great, great place to work.
Beautiful. All right, I'm going to turn it over to questions that you all might have. Make sure we're hitting on things that are on your minds about this, if you have any. Thanks.
I'd love to hear more about what you think law students could do, you know, what kind of internships or what kind of activities they should be doing while they're in law school to help set themselves up to make that post-grad employment in higher ed an easier path. Or if it matters, or if they can just go do whatever is interesting. Do you have
So
thoughts
I've
on that?
coached several students into this, and particularly in my area of student affairs. And sometimes we do have to tell a story that helps different parts of campus understand why they would benefit from working with a law student compared to maybe a student who's in education already, and it seems to align so perfectly. But the good news is, since we're understaffed, which most universities are, we kind of always need help. And there's work groups going or committees happening. So even if there wasn't a formal internship role or graduate assistant position in someone's office, I have coached students into having informational interviews with the leader of a unit to say, hey, I'm interested and I'm here and I'd love to help. Is there a project that you've got going that maybe I could assist with? So we've had students working in Nicole's office, definitely, the conduct office on campus, other places in athletics too, where our law students were able to just come over and help with a project that was going on that then might have turned into a little bit more of a role or even a part-time kind of gig that you could have. But it's basically, you know, we need the help, so we don't necessarily want to turn people away. It's just kind of finding the place on campus that makes sense for you or has some interest for you, and then just starting to talk to people if there's not a formal role that you could apply for. Other thoughts?
Well, I think there is the externship that opportunity that Kimberly talked about, right? So sometimes those exist. But I would also say that never underestimate the value of the job you might have as a student, even if it's not in higher ed, and how that can parlay into something within higher ed, right? So there have been students who have, you know, they've done conduct jobs, and we've had students who've gone off and maybe interned with like a sports team, and then they can come back and say, I'm really interested in athletics, and here's something I did that's sports related, and it's really impressive if you do an internship at the NBA or you know, soccer or something. And so there are other ways to gain those experiences and then transition those to demonstrate how they're related to something you want to do in higher ed.
One unique way of serving, and I did it when I was in law school, and it's a lot of opportunities are currently available that I think a lot of graduate students don't even realize, are committee service. Most, both Senate-related, which deal mostly with the academic functions of the university, or administrative committees, do have student seats on those. And a lot of those are actually really crucial committees that make decisions that have a huge impact on students' lives and the university's life. You can just go on the website and take a look at which committees have student seats, and especially the ones that are with ASUO. The ASUO is always looking for graduate students, because graduate students do not generally raise their hand and show up to it. I actually did. I served as the ASUO senator for graduate school for 2 years, and I was in law school, and that was a huge benefit for me to have a better understanding of the institution. I don't necessarily recommend that. It takes a lot of time, but I did it, and for me, as someone who ended up building a career in higher ed, it was important. But I also served. I worked in student conduct for a decade, and my first taste of that is I served on the University Appeals Board. I just thought it was interesting and volunteered for it, and I heard appeals cases and kind of understood what that process was like. I also served on the Intercollegiate Athletic Committee in its older incarnation back when it was a very interesting experience, and learned how we funded Matthew Knight Arena and discussions around that going in that era, and listening to the arguments about that. You can be on committees that help to evaluate and advocate sometimes for students who are facing disqualification, who are looking to have different exemptions made about certain statuses, especially in the COVID time. So many of these things came up, and there's always student seats in those committees, on policy development groups, on so many different things. And if you have questions about that type of service specifically, I work with all the committees, so please literally come to me and I'll talk to you about it. But it's a great way where you can have tangible experience at an institution. You're not going to get paid for it, but you're going to be really connected, and there's a wide variety of areas you can serve as a student.
The other flag I would make is just trying different things, but then focusing on the ones you really enjoy, what you're actually doing. So I'll share 2 experiences from my law school days. So After I think it was my first year of law school, I went to DC and I worked with Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund, and I was very interested in environmental law. And it was a great group, and they were working on wonderful issues. And I hated how I spent my time, because I spent most of my time alone in their library just doing research and writing. And I realized I just like to work with lots of people, and that job just didn't do it for me in terms of the day-to-day, like what am I actually doing? And so it was really helpful to know, okay, this isn't exactly what I want to be doing, even though it was a great organization. In contrast, in law school, I got way into all of the ADR, alternative dispute resolution world. I did mediation training, I became a small claims mediator, I then moved on to parent-child mediation and some criminal mediation, some other stuff. And I had no idea how that would help me in the future, but I just really enjoyed it. And I ended up, writing articles for HMP, the mediation program and other things. And then that actually helped me tremendously in my career, but I did that because I enjoyed it and I was learning and I was challenged. And so part of me, it's good to think about where you want to go. I think it's also good to just think about what you like. Because if you get really good at the stuff you like, then it's more likely you'll be experienced and have the credentials to get into the jobs that do the kind of things that you like. So I just encourage you to think about that.
Yeah, and I would echo everything that everyone has said, but if you're interested in the policy world, specifically of higher ed, U of O has a lot of great opportunities on campus. So one is working as a law student, paid worker in the government relations office. It's a great job. It pays more than $20 an hour, and you get to do both state and federal policy research and interact with elected officials. While I was in that student position, I actually was on a panel with Congressman DeFazio and helped put together visits and also DC visits. So when we would have, one example would be Dean Burke was going to DC, and I set up all of her meetings and prepped her and did all of the background work for her for those visits. So it's a great opportunity and really puts you in a position where you are doing real work that's being used that you can point to when you graduate to get a job working in government relations. U of O also has a legislative scholars program that's open to both undergraduate and graduate and law students, and that's a program where essentially you learn the skills to be an effective advocate for the institution, and you actually get real world advocacy experience advocating for the Public University Support Fund and for student aid on the state level, and federal research policy and some other issues on the federal level. And so I would highly recommend being a part of that program. And then reaching out to folks on campus, like Dean Espinola was saying, there's a lot of interesting opportunities to be helpful. Universities are always understaffed. And also reach out to folks at other institutions too. In Portland, if you're doing the Portland program, your third year, PSU, for example, has a couple of law student positions on their campus that they always reach out to U of O about. And so look for opportunities like that.
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, my question is for Jamie. I'm currently a trailing partner. My partner's going to law school, and she's got a few different offers, but I'm looking for jobs in the places where she's been accepted. And I'm just wondering how you found your job coming here and what you've talked about in your interviews related to being a trailing partner. Elaborate on that a little bit, please.
Yeah, so it did take me a little bit of time. Now, my situation was a little complex because I was 30 weeks pregnant as well when I moved out here. And I was working for a small company, this tech company that didn't get their C round of funding, so they were about to go under. And what I ended up doing, which worked for me for a while, is I spent about a year, a little over a year, just doing some consulting because that was my background, and just networking with organizations. So I basically just built this networking tree where I got a list of 3 or 4 people in the business community, and then every time I'd go for just an informational meet and greet, I wanted to walk out of that meeting with more than 2 names, because then I felt like I'm meeting more and more people, and I'm very A-type, so I had this little tree that I was keeping track of, and all I'd talk to them about is I'd share my background, I'd learn about what they do, I'd ask them if they knew anyone who might be interesting for me to meet, and it was just purely, it wasn't like me saying, hey, I want a job, it was just me saying, hey, I'm here because my spouse, is here, and I need to figure out what I'm doing long term. And over time, I just met more and more people that way, and eventually learned. I worked for a small company in town for about a year, and then an opportunity actually came up at the law school. And I will say, if you're interested in higher ed, working at a law school is a very natural place to start because you all have, or many of you have law backgrounds, so that's very helpful. But it was really just a lot of just coffee meetings with people and trying to just meet as many people in the community and just let them know who I am, like what skill sets I bring, and that worked really well for me.
So networking is the key.
It was the key, but I want to be really clear. It wasn't like immediately trying to get a job. It was really just trying to meet as many people as possible and let them know, like, I'm here, here's what I've done, here's the kinds of things I'm interested in. And just, again, my little micro goal was always get at least one name out of a meeting so my tree doesn't get smaller, and then hopefully 2 or more.
So you're not a law student, your partner's a law student?
I'm a law student
You're a law
here.
student too, okay, and then you're gonna be a trailing partner somewhere.
Yes.
So, I mean, the other thing to think about, I don't know what your particular area of interest is, but, I mean, right now, there's just also a lot more opportunity to work remotely. And so you might consider whether, you know, working remotely initially is an option for you. I was at a party with a faculty member actually pretty recently, and I ran into 2 former U of O students who'd been students when I was here working here, and both of them lived in Bend, and both of them had remote jobs. And so they
Law-related type jobs?
there were law jobs. There were law jobs and they were remote.
Yeah.
And so there are an increasing number of remote jobs, even sometimes maybe potentially contract work as an attorney that you could do remotely. So those also might be options available to you.
Yeah.
And I'll just say to all of you, my experience in the past 2 years is our pools for hiring candidates have been very small. So I actually think it's a great time to apply for jobs. And so, you know, I would say even don't underestimate your value in pursuing opportunities that you feel like you may not be qualified for, because you could be qualified for them. Even if they suggest they might want so many years of experience, if it looks interesting and you feel like you can make a case for yourself, I would say apply, because honestly, I feel like the pools have been really small in the past 2 years. So I think it leverages your degree even more in that space. So don't take yourself out of the running if something looks appealing to you.
Honestly, that happened to me. I mean, the first job I got out of law school on paper, I was definitely not qualified for. But I thought a lot and worked with folks on how to leverage my experiences and talk about it. A lot of higher education institutions, if it says a minimum qualification, you have to abide by that. But you can also think about how you can fit within the minimum qualification as long as it's reasonable, and then it's on them to make that decision whether it fits. So I think that making sure, that's a great point, and just thinking about inventorying your skills and your experience and really pitching it and being able to connect it to that experience which is on paper, but also being really focused. It did work for me, and so it's not impossible. You just have to be really good about advocating for yourself and talking about how that experience fits that role.
Any last questions? Yeah, thanks.
Just real quick, I'm curious to hear kind of what early careers look like for you guys, because it sounds like a lot of it is understaffed. Are you kind of thrown in the deep end, or does it take some time to get responsibilities within your careers?
Oh, so my first job was as a law clerk. So I became very, very adept at operating and unjamming a copier. Skill that still comes in handy today. Then my first job, so that I also did a lot of things for the court in that first job when I was clerking. But I think my first legal job, I mean, I was certainly supervised by attorneys, but within my first year, I was going to court, I was writing motions, and so I also really think it depends on the kind, you practice law, the kind of place where you end up, how much opportunity you get, right? Whether if you go to a firm, for example, decide I'm going to get some experience, whether you end up at a firm where a litigator is someone who writes memos all day or briefs all day but never goes to court, or if you end up in a place where they actually send you to court and give you the opportunity to get those experiences. And I think when you start in a job, I think it's really important to work hard and do good work, because that is what actually lets people give you more responsibility, more opportunity.
I got thrown thrown in the deep end. I remember my very first job, this was with the consulting firm, the very first week, it was a Fortune 500 company, and I was in a board meeting. And I remember sitting there thinking, don't ask me anything. Nobody asked me anything, right? They weren't going to, but so I had a great opportunity where they gave me a real substantive piece of the work, but gave me support too and training on how to do it. So I think every job is different. I had some internship opportunities when I was in grad school that were wonderful and supported, and I had others where it was, not meaningful work, and it just depends on the organization.
I just have a very specific thought on that for higher ed specifically. You might be doing all kinds of crazy stuff and it might be overwhelming, but during an interview process, really get a feel about whether someone's going to have your back. That's such an important piece and is then going to be an advocate for you to move forward. Because if you feel overwhelmed and you don't have that, that can be really, really tough. But if you feel overwhelmed and you feel like there's going to be someone that you can really connect with and is going to put it all in perspective, that is so, so important in the higher ed space.
Yeah, and I would just add that higher ed is a space that supports innovation. And so when I first started at U of O in government relations, my job was actually associate director of advocacy. And I essentially built a new job for myself, working with my boss and with my department. Because I pointed out, like, there are things that I'm doing that are outside of the scope of my current job description. But a lot of those things were things I proposed. So it was, just various pieces of our advocacy and supporting our state and federal agendas in a way that they hadn't initially anticipated. But the job that I got, I actually was way overqualified for when you looked at the minimum qualifications. But the reason I applied was because I knew I wanted to work in higher ed policy. And so it was my foot in the door, and it was a great opportunity. And if you're trying to put like a square peg in a round hole, sometimes you just need to change the shape of the hole to make it fit.
That's such a great point. I've done this twice in higher ed where I've basically created 2 jobs for myself. Just by showing enthusiasm and interest and trying to make myself credible in a space. But higher ed can see the value in that sometime and be able to do things with some creativity, which is a really good point.
If you're in higher ed and you want to work hard, no one's going to stop you.
This is true. This is true. But I have definitely found it to be the most rewarding space I could imagine being in. So let's thank our amazing panelists. Thank you so much for sharing all this incredible wisdom.